got up and applauded our soldiers and the families who were in the gallery, who deserve our respect. But the speech, as I said, when you see what he's actually doing in Washington, the speech has an air of unreality to it. So I wasn't up on my feet applauding very much.
Senator Schumer, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
All right, let's get a different perspective. The top Senate Republican, the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, is joining us right now. We've got a bunch of questions for you as well. Let's go back to Jake for the first question.
Leader McConnell, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
You bet.
So obviously there was a lot in the speech that was a bit different from what you normally would hear from a Republican president delivering an address to a joint session of Congress. What did you make of the president's call for more infrastructure spending, for paid family leave, for a reduction in prescription drug prices?
Yeah, first let me say I find myself in agreement with Van Jones for the first time in my political life. I think for people who are not Republicans and already committed to the president and his agenda, Donald Trump did indeed become presidential tonight. And I think we'll see that reflected in a higher approval rating. I also rarely find my counterpart, Chuck Schumer, speechless. He was having a very, very difficult time finding a way to critique what the president said tonight. An aggressive agenda for change in our country, a change, by the way, that people very much voted for in the presidential election. They didn't vote for change in Congress. They wanted somebody who would sign the bills that we wanted to pass on repealing and replacing Obamacare, on doing comprehensive tax reform, on deregulating America and getting it moving again. I thought it was an inspirational speech. It really was widely applauded, as you can imagine, on our side, but greeted with a lot more applause and respect on the other side than I would have anticipated.
The president, Senator, gave us spoke to a few reporters today, including Jake and me, and he said this. He said, quote, "The time is ripe for an immigration bill as long as there is compromise on both sides." Are you ready for comprehensive immigration reform right now?
Yeah, we're anxious to see what the president wants to do about immigration. We know we need a stronger border. We know we need a legal immigration plan that actually works, unlike what we have now. Yeah, we're very much open to an immigration proposal from the administration. Anxious to take a look at what the president would recommend. Are
you open to legal status for millions of undocumented immigrants who are in the United States?
We're certainly open to see what the president recommends, and I think we are certainly in agreement that there are a lot of things that need to be changed by the way we currently handle legal immigration as well as the serious illegal immigration problem.
Mr. Leader, it's Dana Bash. I want to ask you about health care and about the fact that I don't need to tell you there is some splintering among Republicans, some where you are in the Senate, but even more so over in the House, about what's an acceptable replacement for Obamacare. Do you think what President Trump said tonight helped, and if so, how?
Well, I think it helps. One thing we all know is that the status quo is not sustainable. You remember Bill Clinton said last year during the campaign, it's the craziest thing you've ever seen. That's Bill Clinton on Obamacare. If Hillary Clinton won the presidency and Chuck Schumer were the majority leader, we'd be revisiting Obamacare. So clearly, it has to change. Obviously, we believe it should be changed in a way consistent with many of the things the president recommended tonight. And we anticipate coming up with a proposal that the Speaker, myself, and the President all agree on, and then trying to sell it to our own members, because we anticipate, as you can imagine, no Democratic support in replacing this monstrosity, because they're stuck with it. The American people expect this to be done. We had an election about it in 2010 and 2012 and 2014 and 2016. They're ready for us to tackle this and come up with a better health care program for our country.
Mitch McConnell is the Senate Majority Leader. Mr. Leader, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Anderson, back to you.
Yeah, I want to quickly check in with Van Jones. Van, how thrilled are you that you and Senator McConnell now are on the same page?
Can I take it back? No. Listen,
we accept.
You're trying to get me killed.
Don't do it, Van.
Exactly, you're trying to get me killed. Hey, listen, I think honestly, there's two things. There's substance and there's tone. The substance of the speech, I disagree with entirely. I mean, on the immigration piece alone, he acted as if the immigrant community is criminal, all these sort of things. The reality is immigrants are committing less crimes than native-born people and giving more than they're taking from the country. But I think at some point, Democrats got to be willing to take yes for an answer. We've been asking for him to be more presidential. We've been asking for him to be less divisive. We've been asking for him to pretend like maybe being the president matters to him as much as it matters to us. And tonight, he showed some glimmers of that. If we can't, as Democrats, say, you know what, thank you for that part, then I think that we are adding to the problem we're trying to solve. We're not going to get there if everything he does we've got to attack, even when he's right.
But that is the question, Governor. I mean, does it last beyond a teleprompter speech?
Well, and
I want to bring the roses and softballs all down to earth a little bit, because tonight, I mean, it wasn't as though he had no divisive language in this speech. I mean, he said, or false statements in this speech.
Everything said about immigration
reform. When he said, well, I mean, what he said about immigration reform is that we're living in an environment of lawless chaos, when in fact crime in the U.S., not only by immigrants, but crime in general, is down 71% since 1994. He says Obamacare is collapsing, imploding, a disaster, when in fact, before Obamacare, the price of health care was rising between 30 and 60% in the 5 years, each 5 years beforehand. He said that this is the worst recovery in 65 years. We've had 75 months of straight job creation. In 2015, wages grew 5.6%, the biggest increase that it had been since on record. We have historic low unemployment. I'm just saying, he's using red meat language in there, so it's not like this was a total kumbaya speech.
Those are pretty soft criticisms, frankly. I mean, because there are ample evidence. First off, this is a historically slow recovery. I mean, you can't argue that it is. I mean, you've had 1.5% growth last year, average of less than 2%. I mean, that's just reality. Wages have been basically flat for 20 years.
That's not true. That is not true.
Obamacare is not in the spin. Look, you have a third of the counties only have one plan. Look, there's a huge problem out here.
We need to fix Obamacare, no doubt.
Okay, he may be overstated the case. This is not red meat. I mean,
this is falsehood. My point is falsehood.
What Donald Trump did was about as mild a criticism for a president. If you go back and look at other things that were said by previous presidents, this is mild by comparison, and it was a lot of stuff that got Democrats off their seats, and that was the story.
John?
I just want to add some emphasis to what our friends across the room were just trying to get out of Mitch McConnell, in addition to his praise and joining hands with Van Jones. Mitch McConnell just said something incredibly important and instructive about the politics of the moment. When Wolf asked him, I believe Wolf was first, about the president said today, let's have immigration reform that allows a path to legal status. Mitch McConnell said, let's see what the president recommends. They asked him again, he said, let's see what the president recommends. The president pulled the pin and rolled a grenade into the conservatives, Capitol Hill. The most conservatives, especially the Tea Party guys, view any legal status as amnesty. This has been quicksand for the Republican primary, for Speaker John Boehner, for Mitch McConnell. They don't want to touch this right now because they have bigger fish they want to deal with, like Obamacare, like tax reform. Mitch McConnell was saying that, Mr. President, you want us to do this? You put it on your letterhead. You put your name on it. You go around the country and sell it. Don't ask us to do it.
But it wasn't in the speech. Canada as an example of immigration, of what he would like to model after. That is really quite surprising.
Gloria,
it wasn't, but
But on the big
what
picture,
he
this is
said,
amnesty. To conservatives, we could argue about whether it is or isn't. Conservatives believe to give legal status to people who came into this country illegally is amnesty, period. Some include the Dreamers in that. Not all, but some even include the Dreamers in that. So for the Republicans to deal with this issue when they're trying to settle the differences on Obamacare, trying to settle the difference on tax reform, trying to deal with other things, is a distraction Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan do not want. And Mitch McConnell was saying, Mr. President, you want to take us into this blender? You go first.
There's a reason, then, that it wasn't in the speech. And the reason you touched on it very vaguely, but this is a big deal. And if he wanted to make it a big deal, he could have, because the fact that he was talking about legal status is a huge shift, and it was not emphasized in any way, shape, or form. It was sort of mildly, kind of tangentially referred to, because he knew exactly what Mitch McConnell's reaction was going to be. He knew exactly what conservatives' reaction was going to be. And that is why he also did not provide any specifics on where he is going
on Obamacare.
But he was supposed to know that at the last
And they wanted, let me just finish, they wanted a guidepost tonight, I think. Republicans in Congress, I talked to a bunch today, they were saying, you know, we'd like to have some things laid down for us. This is what the president will accept. This is what the president won't accept. And, Senator, you're shaking your head because he didn't do it, because he doesn't want to box himself in, obviously. But so they're kind of flying blind.
No, he didn't do it not because he doesn't want to box himself in. He didn't do it because they don't have an answer. They don't have an answer. This catastrophe that Mitch McConnell described has reduced the uninsured rate in his state from 20.4 to 7.8.
Right.
So the real catastrophe is the politics of trying to undo this and tell all those people who finally have the opportunity to have insurance that they're not going to have it anymore. And that is something that Republican politicians don't want to do. We had governors in this state. We had the governors in this city in the past few days. 32 of them have expanded Medicaid, many of them Republican governors. They are death on that House plan. And there are all kinds of landmines in that House plan. That plan will not get through the United States.
And I mean, one of the things that was interesting in listening to Mitch McConnell, I mean, he almost likened the position that they're in to the position that Hillary Clinton would have been in if she got elected. He basically said that if Hillary Clinton had gotten in, they would be revisiting Obamacare. And that's the language that he used as well, sort of tinkering around the edges. Not the he never used the phrase repeal and replace.
The Massachusetts bill is a great example of this. Now, there aren't that many Republicans in Massachusetts, so it's not apples and apples. But the Massachusetts bill was passed under Governor Mitt Romney with a bipartisan consensus. They've had to go back several times and revisit it because when you do something so big, of course, you get things wrong, or the marketplace changes, or even when they passed the Massachusetts one, they sort of acknowledged up front, we're not quite sure how we're going to pay for this, so let's pass it and we'll come back at it. But because they have a bipartisan consensus, they come back every couple of years and tweak it. Because Obamacare was passed with no Republican votes, welcome to Washington.
Successful presidencies run on two tracks. One is what you saw tonight, which is rallying public opinion, giving people the image of the leader. The second part is the details, all the things that we're talking about here. You use the first to negotiate the second. So what his mission was tonight was to do the first, which he did, I think we all agree, extremely well. Now comes the devil in the details, but he gets leverage out of this kind of a speech, and he's going to use it.
Let me just talk about something that he touched on, that he opened a door that could be negative or positive. He did talk about Chicago. He did raise this question around violent crime. The reality is, I think both parties have failed on this. It is true that crime has been going down. It's also true that there now is a little bounce back up. It's a bounce back up. Often it seems that the Republicans just point to that to embarrass liberal Democratic mayors, but they don't actually have a plan to do anything about it, to your point. But also it sometimes seems that the Democrats are kind of just duck on it and point to statistics and don't talk about the funerals. He has opened the door now to say we're going to talk about this. I think Democrats need to rush in and actually force him to do something. If you want to talk about what's happening in these communities, Rahm Emanuel has put plans and requests on the table. Nothing has been done by the Trump administration. There are things that can be done. The business community can be rallied. The faith community can be rallied. The government should be doing something about this. It is an emergency. But right now, Donald Trump is just speechifying about it. He's not doing anything about it. That's an opportunity. Another opportunity is he missed an opportunity tonight to talk about the opioid crisis. Listen, you have people dying right now more from opioids than from car crashes. It was a huge issue in the Republican primary. There were 5 million people did a big thing online begging Trump to say something about opioids. He didn't say anything about it. So if he's concerned about the pain at the bottom, he can find willing partners in red states and blue states who want something to happen. I didn't see a real plan to deal with that kind of stuff. So, yeah, listen, the speech, there were positive things in that speech, but if he wants to be serious about being a healer, he's got a long way to go.
Well, number one, he has been talking about that, not just tonight, but he's been talking about that throughout the campaign.
But where is it?
Number one.
Well, number two, the solution for the opioid crisis was to really build the wall because of drugs.
He did mention drugs. He didn't mention specific opioids, but he certainly talked about the rash of drugs and the scourge of drugs and the fact that it's coming over the border.
I want to say something about that, sir.
He did do that. The other thing, how about the Senate confirming his Secretary of HUD, Ben Carson? I talked to Ben last week. He is champing at the bit, ready to get to work on a lot of these things, and he's being held up. So,
Senator, I want to ask you a question now. is misleading the public, and I think you know it, when he says the way you deal with the big drug crisis today is at the border. The drugs are coming out of folks' medicine cabinets.
Yeah, pharmacies.
It's the big pharmacies. And he's not talking about that honestly, and people are dying. Don't you think that Republicans and Democrats should be doing something about the opioid piece more than just talking about the daggum wall? He's not going to do one thing to save these lives of these kids dying from these opioids?
I think, as you know, there's a multi-plank strategy in dealing with this crisis. Part of it is the drug problem is coming across the border. You're right. It's not the opioid. Part of it is the opioid, but not a lot of it is right. And a lot of these synthetic drugs and other things that are happening. So yes, putting more teeth with money, I would agree with that. With addiction, states are doing that. I know New Hampshire did. A bunch of Republican governors are coming forward. And I don't doubt that Donald Trump's going to come forward with something that deals with this crisis and put some federal dollars in. But it has to be multi-level. It can't just be more money. It's got to be. It's also got to be.
Let me just say a couple of things. First of all, at the same time that you're talking about taking a huge axe to discretionary domestic spending, it's hard to see where this money is going to come from. At the same time that you're talking about block granting and cutting Medicaid, I don't know where this anti-drug effort is going to come from. But on Chicago, I can only speak as a Chicagoan. It is so horrifying to see what has happened in some of the neighborhoods of our city. It's isolated, but it is painful. And I think most Chicagoans would love to get help and cooperation. And what they're saying is, we want solutions. We don't want to be a punchline. The mayor has sent a series of things that the police feel could help, prosecutors feel could help. And it's just about time for the president to say, you know what, I've talked about it enough, and now I'm going to try and help.
And wouldn't one of the things to help be really focusing on how to partner on bringing in jobs to areas that are really underserved and without hope? To me, that's one of the biggest areas. I totally applaud him for continuing a focus on Make It in America. And the question is, what are the policy teeth that you have behind that, in addition to the trade issue? That's one issue. I don't know if he's going to get Congress to buy in. As you know, it's really tough on the Republican side, even some Democrats. But what is your economic partnership, development strategies in these cities? If you're really going to create jobs, you have to have a partnership. You can talk about infrastructure, and in that he talked about a public-private partnership. You know, when you talk about public-private partnerships in infrastructure, what does that mean? That means that everyday citizens might have to pay a toll. That means that you have to apply a public-private partnership to new infrastructure, probably not to existing infrastructure, unless you get a huge backlash because people are used to driving on their roads and their bridges. But what is the direct spend that he's going to be doing to create jobs in communities across the country?
And what he's talking about in terms of jobs, and what he talked about in this speech tonight, was, I'm creating a lot of jobs because I'm meeting with a lot of CEOs.
Yeah, come on.
And I'm keeping them from going abroad because I'm probably promising them some tax breaks. And I'm meeting with CEOs.
But he didn't even say that.
Well, he didn't say that, but that's...
He's been saying it.
Right.
He says we're going to lower taxes in general.
Right, we're going to lower corporate taxes. But so what I'm doing is, one by one, which Republicans call crony capitalism because they don't really like it. Let me just say that, but they're not loudly objecting to it right now. But that's what they're thinking and saying to each other. And this is what he's doing instead of doing what you're saying, Governor. So I think that, you know, he is using it and saying, look, I bludgeoned people, and it's by the force of me
well, that's part of it.
He
is saying that, but he's saying more. Look, if you look at the energy policies put forward with the Keystone Pipeline, Buy America Steel, all of those things, that's number one.
Right.
You look at the corporate tax.
That's
I mean, the fact that we're not competitive, our corporations are not competitive. You look at he's talked tariffs. He talked, flirted with this border adjustment tax. I mean, he's talking about trying to do things to level the playing field for American manufacturers. We haven't seen that in a long, long time by any Democrat or Republican president.
But has he said he signed on to the border adjustment tax?
No, he hasn't. But I'm saying He's talked about trying to level the playing field, and he's let
And Wilbur
he's
Ross is
not
all
he's
about
not going to get
renegotiating.
into the
That's
policy
true.
details that a traditional president's going to get into. He's just not going to do that. He certainly didn't.
Well, he has to at some point.
But he's left open the door for the kinds of discussions that we haven't seen in a long, long time, and he has done the regulatory. I mean, he really has focused on getting on. You talk to all the manufacturers, you talk to people who are working men and women in this country who are working in those jobs. It's the regulations that are killing.
You know what's curious? What's curious to me is
regulations that are killing.
One at a time, David.
I think he boasted in this speech about the stock market taking off and so on. I think he did.
Yeah, he did.
So all these unproductive, hobbled corporations seem to be doing pretty well. But listen, I don't think Democrats and Republicans alike are being completely honest about this issue. You know, he jawboned Carrier.
Yeah.
They said we'll stay, and then shortly thereafter they announced, but we may automate a lot of the work. And I think we're going to see more and more of this. This is the great challenge of our time. There wasn't a word of that in his speech. He's fighting a battle that really was a battle that we lost about 2 decades ago. And where is the plan for that? Where is the strategy for that? And frankly, I don't hear enough Democrats talking about it either.
Automation is part of saving jobs. Being more efficient in your production is how you keep jobs here.
The robots. We should see a
We
plan
should be building
from
them
him
here.
about
That's
who's
right.
going to be building those. Why doesn't he take advantage of the fastest growing sector, which is in clean energy? You better believe those governors you talked about, they are all about creating clean energy jobs in their state.
We said
in Ohio, in Iowa. I mean, they're
driverless cars are going to come online by the end of this decade. There are millions of people who make a living driving cars. Where are they going in the economy? What is our strategy for that? Oxford did a study and said in the next 20 years we're going to lose 45% of our jobs to automation. Where are those people going in our economy? This is a real issue. This requires a strategy. Where is the strategy?
The thing you're forgetting here is that and I'm looking, Senator, at a company called Covestro, which is in Pittsburgh. And they are one of the largest manufacturers of producers of polymers. And they are thrilled with Donald Trump and what he's saying. They are thrilled as manufacturers with what he's doing because they believe that this is going to bring more manufacturing jobs to Pittsburgh. That's exactly
I just want to say, listen, I love all the manufacturing jobs, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but the reality is when the manufacturing jobs left America, there were a lot of people working on very few machines. When and if they come back, there's going to be few people working on a lot of machines because the automation piece, listen, even in Baltimore, they opened up a big so-called factory, and it turned out the last person who's going to have a job in that factory is the person who cut the factory on. The whole factory is a robot. So we have to be able to be honest. We want these jobs back. But David is 100% right, and both political parties went through an 18-month process and acted like the only challenge was either Wall Street or trade. Silicon Valley is going to wipe out about 1 billion jobs over the next, 10 to 15 years, and we need a strategy for that. Now, a lot of the sloganeering sounds great from the populists on both sides. Sanders sounds great, and Trump sounds great. But they all act like if we fix trade, we'll get manufacturing jobs and everything will be fine. It's not true. And so investing, you'll like this, investing in the human capital as well as the infrastructure is something that we need to have a much bigger focus on. I think there could be common ground there, but I think we're missing it because I think we're lying about the problem.
Well, and so the education system is where you've got to start. He gave a little paragraph in this speech to education, and it seemed like he was suggesting, because of who was introduced in the audience, a young woman who had gotten some kind of grant and got to be able to choose where she went, that it was more than choice. I sort of got a voucher thing. I wasn't, because he talked about private schools. And you should be able to choose a private school with public money. It seemed like he was saying, and of course with Betsy DeVos at the helm of the Department of Education, she has championed vouchers, for decades and decades. So I'll be curious to see. But your point about human capital, getting these kids as part of their curriculum to learn to code, all of that.
I was excited that very little was spent on education because 90% of education money is spent at the state and local level, not at the federal government. It's not the federal government's job to run education policy. And in fact, the overwhelming consensus from parents is they don't want the federal government going in there running their schools.
Rick, in the 21st century,
And when it comes to education and training, many states are doing a fabulous job in stepping forward. Mike Pence, before he left Indiana, put vocational education back into the school systems. Nikki Haley, when she was in South Carolina, has tech centers all over training.
This is in the 21st century. In the 21st century, education and training is the economic defense budget that we have to concentrate on. So I understand local control of schools, and the federal government doesn't have to be command and control, but there has to be a strategy to make sure that wherever you live in this country, you can get the training you deserve. But on the issue of politics, let me just say, I understand. I've been in politics and around politics all my life. It's sexier to attack the Chinese and the Mexicans for taking our jobs than to attack robots and computers, so we get what we get. But that isn't really going to solve the problem that we face moving forward.
Speaking of the defense budget, I think everybody's kind of letting that go, like it makes sense what he's talking about, and I don't think it makes. I just wanted to say, listen, I don't think a 10% increase in the defense budget, that you don't pay for in any obvious way. First of all, you sound like the bankrupter in chief. If you add all the stuff he's talking about, he wants to spend more on defense, spend more on some of these domestic programs, and not raise taxes, cut the whole. So he becomes a bankrupter in chief, and I don't think the people we're fighting right now.
I think I just heard Mitch McConnell withdraw his endorsement.
Van Jones, the deficit.
McConnell says one nice thing about him, and he goes all deficit.
I agree with you completely. I mean, he's not touching any of the problems that conservative Republicans are talking about, and now Democrats are deficit hawks, reborn deficit
After
hawks.
$1 trillion Obama
but you're talking about 54,
just trying to fix George W. Bush's problems. That's
$54 billion. I mean, John McCain says it's not enough, but it's $54 billion, 10% increase. You're not touching entitlements. Defense and entitlements are 3/4 of the budget. So you have this little sliver left.
Waste, fraud, and abuse.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. $600 total.
Obamacare and Medicaid are both entitlements, and they will be touched. Obamacare and Medicaid are two of the four big entitlements.
Great. So 22 million people out of
But what enemy do we need a 10% increase in our existing budget to defeat?
Well, I think it's worse than that. There's a 37. One thing that we hear is
to fight who?
The argument is that military has been under this so-called sequester, which means across the board cuts for the last, 6, 7, 8 years? I don't even remember anymore.
And we have a bigger military.
President Obama proposed a fairly substantial increase, not this substantial. But the thing that's that's very concerning here with all this talk of pieces, they're talking about a 37% cut in the State Department. The most interesting thing that's happened since that story surfaced is the number of generals who have stepped forward and said, you know what, we'd rather give a little to make sure that we have the kind of programs that the State Department is engaged in, because that makes it less likely
Lindsey Graham today said that proposal is dead on arrival.
Across the Republican Party, there has been a lot of criticism to the specifics of the budget. People saying that most of the Republicans want to increase the defense budget, don't get me wrong, but they say they don't want to cut the State Department. They say that they've cut domestic discretionary spending as much as they can and those other programs. So he's going to have a fight in his own party about the details about it. But the not-so-dirty little secret in Washington is they understand that this is a very difficult budget for the first president because he's not a Republican in many ways. He did promise more spending, and so as they try to keep their promises this year, they're hoping that this promise of tax reform and the regulatory stuff Senator Santorum was talking about, the things that are causing the optimism in the stock market, they're hoping it ultimately trickles out into the broader economy. Because how did Bill Clinton do it? Because he had growth. With all those jobs, you had growth, and there's more money coming into Washington. So you can cut taxes and increase spending in some places at the same time. So the second and third Trump budget, they're hoping, has a lot more money to work with.
The percentage of growth he was talking about during the campaign, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, he was talking about 4% or so.
Which is, he's not talking about that.
This one is 2.5%.
On infrastructure, though, I mean, it's interesting because now they're talking about deferring the infrastructure program to 2018. As a political matter, there's a certain logic to having the infrastructure hit later than right now, because it'll be more helpful in that election and perhaps in his election. But he used a word tonight that he talked about making investments that would produce $1 trillion in infrastructure. And a lot of the discussion is he talking about tax credits for infrastructure, which will essentially give benefits to people who are going to do that work anyway, or is he going to talk about investing actual hard dollars in the kinds of roads and bridges and the real fundamental infrastructure repair that may not be a good investment for a private equity firm, but is very necessary to community.
And this is what Chuck Schumer was talking about when he said, I haven't heard from the president on this infrastructure bill because his natural allies are the Democrats in this particular endeavor.
Unless it's tax credits.
Unless it's tax credits, and it might be Republican.
Talking about how to pay for stuff, I was wondering where our commercial breaks are because I've literally been sitting here like wait a minute, is my IP not working? We are going to toss to, I think, our first commercial in like 30 minutes or so. The first results from our exclusive instant poll of people who watched President Trump's speech, which of his policies got the best and the worst reaction. We'll show you that in real time. Our reality check team will also tell us whether the president got his facts straight on the murder and the unemployment rates as well. More ahead.